The stainless steel serving spoon struck the edge of the tray with a loud clang. "So that's all you're giving me?" a student snapped, pushing his plate back toward me. "Do cafeteria workers get paid extra for being stingy?" Laughter rippled across the lunch line. I looked at the tray. The portion matched the school's nutrition chart exactly. "You can come back for seconds after everyone has been served," I said calmly. "Oh, listen to him." The boy rolled his eyes dramatically. "He talks like he owns the place." More laughter. Someone behind him whispered, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I heard he's almost 40. No, really? Imagine ending up serving mashed potatoes at your age." Their amusement spread faster than spilled soup. I simply reached for the next tray. Next, that only irritated them more. They wanted embarrassment. Silence was somehow more offensive. Just then, conversations across the cafeteria faded. The doors opened. Student Council President Vivian Hart stepped inside, with several council members following behind her. She carried herself like someone who had never doubted that every room belonged to her. Elegant uniform, perfect posture, measured smile. Students instinctively moved aside. Her family donated buildings. Her grades topped every semester. Her speeches filled auditoriums. To most people at Westbridge Academy, Vivian Hart represented success itself. She stopped in front of my serving station. "Chicken," she said without looking at me. I served the meal exactly as instructed. She finally glanced up, only briefly, long enough to wrinkle her nose. "Can someone else serve me?" The cafeteria manager hurried over. "Miss Hart, is something wrong? I don't like being served by people who clearly don't understand presentation." She pointed, not at the food, at me. "I've seen cleaner uniforms." The manager immediately bowed his head. "I'm terribly sorry." Then he turned toward me. "Mr. Rowan, go wash up again." My sleeves were spotless. My apron had no stains. He knew it. I knew it. But Vivian's opinion mattered more than the truth. I quietly removed my serving gloves. "Understood." As I walked away, whispers chased behind me. "He actually listened. What choice does he have? Poor guy. Poor." The word had followed me for years. Funny enough, money had never been the problem. The storage room smelled faintly of detergent and cardboard. I leaned against the shelves and closed my eyes. Humiliation wasn't new. Recognition was. Every time someone almost recognized my face from an old newspaper article, I accepted another anonymous job somewhere else. Peace required invisibility. 3 years. That was how long I had managed to disappear. No interviews. No photographs. No conferences. No board meetings. No luxury offices. Just ordinary work. Exactly what I wanted. The door creaked open. My supervisor, Mrs. Alvarez, stepped inside carrying a clipboard. "They crossed the line today. I've had worse." "I know." She hesitated. "The board wants volunteers for tomorrow's scholarship anniversary ceremony." I opened my eyes. "What ceremony?" She frowned. "You really don't follow school news?" I smiled faintly. "I stopped following a lot of things." She flipped through her papers. "The Harrison Future Foundation celebrates its 15th anniversary tomorrow." My fingers tightened around the edge of the shelf. 15 years. Already. They're announcing another 100 full scholarships. She sighed dreamily. If only more rich people thought like Mr. Harrison. I didn't answer. She continued. "They say nobody even knows what he looks like anymore." "I've heard." "They say he refuses every interview." "So I've heard." "They say he personally reviews every finalist." I looked toward the small window. Outside, students laughed beneath bright autumn sunlight. "They say he believes talent should never depend on family income." Mrs. Alvarez smiled. "I admire people like that." I smiled too, very slightly. "So do I." She never noticed. No one ever did. Because no one imagined the man stocking canned vegetables was listening to strangers praise a name he had buried years ago. Harrison, my mother's surname. The only name I had kept. The only fortune I had never spent on myself. The following morning, banners covered the campus. 15th anniversary. Harrison Future Foundation. Students took photographs beneath golden balloons. Faculty members rehearsed speeches. Security teams inspected every entrance. Rumors spread like wildfire. They say Mr. Harrison might finally appear. No chance. He hasn't shown his face in 15 years. My father offered $10 million just for one meeting. I heard he declined. Every version made me smile. People always exaggerated mysteries they couldn't solve. Meanwhile, I pushed a breakfast cart toward the auditorium. Invisible, exactly where I belonged, until Vivian Hart stepped directly into my path. She folded her arms. You. I stopped. Yes. The council reserved this hallway. I'm delivering breakfast for the volunteers. She looked at the cart, then back at me. There are other routes. They're blocked. She sighed impatiently. Must everything become difficult? I met her eyes for the first time. There was confidence there, but also something else. Certainty. The certainty that status determined value. People like me existed to step aside. Always. I'll wait, I said. She nodded once. As you should. The council members walked past without another glance. One of them intentionally bumped the cart. Coffee spilled across the floor. Cups shattered. Nobody apologized. Vivian didn't turn around. I crouched quietly, picking up broken ceramic one piece at a time. A shadow stopped beside me. An elderly janitor silently handed me another dustpan. Neither of us spoke. Sometimes dignity survived through shared silence. He finally murmured, "They don't know who they're talking to." I smiled. "No, they will." I looked toward the auditorium entrance, where hundreds of students gathered beneath the foundation's banner. Eventually, the auditorium buzzed with expectation long before the ceremony began. Every seat was filled. Parents, donors, reporters, alumni, and scholarship finalists occupied the rows while faculty members hurried along the aisles with forced smiles. I stayed behind the curtains with the catering team, arranging bottled water on a service table. Invisible, comfortably invisible. From a gap in the stage drapes, I watched Vivian Hart step up to the podium. Applause erupted. She accepted it as naturally as breathing. "Welcome," she began, her voice steady and polished. "The Harrison Future Foundation has changed thousands of lives. As someone whose own academic journey has been inspired by its values, I hope one day to contribute to society in the same way its founder has." The audience applauded again. She continued with confidence. "Although Mr. Harrison remains anonymous, his vision reminds us that influence isn't measured by visibility. It is measured by the futures we create." I lowered my gaze. Those words sounded familiar, because I had written almost the same sentence 15 years earlier. Back then, I believed anonymity protected the mission. Over time, anonymity had become a prison I willingly accepted. Mrs. Alvarez nudged my shoulder. "She speaks well." "She does. Hard to believe she's only 20. I nodded. "She's intelligent. Pity she's so proud." I didn't answer. Pride often came from never being forced to question your place in the world. The ceremony continued. Videos played across enormous screens. Scholarship recipients shared emotional stories. One young woman described sleeping in her family's car before receiving financial support. A young man admitted he had nearly abandoned medicine to work construction. Each story carried pieces of lives I had never personally met but had quietly helped shape. I listened from behind the curtain. That was enough. Then the host smiled toward the audience. "We would also like to thank the Hart Educational Group for their generous partnership." Vivian's father, Charles Hart, stood and waved confidently. His tailored suit drew almost as much attention as the stage itself. He loved cameras. Unlike me, he walked up to deliver a prepared speech. "Our family has always believed education creates opportunity." His words flowed smoothly. Years of public appearances had perfected every pause. Then he smiled broadly. "And we remain grateful that the Harrison Future Foundation continues accepting our annual donations." My expression didn't change. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, "He seems nice." I simply looked at the stage. Charles Hart wasn't lying. He did donate. Every application had been rejected. The foundation accepted no money tied to branding rights or influence over recipient selection. His checks had always been returned, quietly, without publicity, yet he continued implying partnership whenever microphones appeared. Interesting. Very interesting. The host suddenly hurried backstage. His face had turned pale. "Where's the replacement check?" What replacement? The ceremonial scholarship check. Someone spilled coffee on it. Staff members began searching everywhere. It's ruined. We need another. The printer jammed. The live stream starts again in 5 minutes. Panic spread. The event coordinator spotted me. You. I looked up. Can you deliver this envelope to the chairman's table? She thrust a sealed folder into my hands without waiting for an answer. Now. I walked calmly across the side aisle toward the reserved seating area. Charles Hart noticed me first. His pleasant expression vanished. Excuse me. I stopped. Catering staff aren't supposed to enter here. I was asked to deliver this. He barely looked at the envelope. Leave it with security. A volunteer hurried over. I told him to bring it. Charles stepped aside reluctantly. As I placed the folder on the table, a familiar voice reached us. Vivian. She had just finished speaking with reporters. Her eyes landed on me. You again? Before I could respond, she noticed the envelope. That belongs on the stage. I know. I'll take it. She reached for it. I kept my hand on the folder. It needs to be signed first. She frowned. Signed by whom? The authorized representative. Charles laughed softly. Young man, this is a ceremonial prop. It still requires authorization. Vivian's patience thinned. You work in the cafeteria? Yes. And you're telling us how foundation documents are processed? I am. She folded her arms. Who exactly gave you that authority? For a brief moment, the noise around us seemed to disappear. The answer was simple. Because I had written every authorization policy. Because I still approved every scholarship. Because every ceremonial check carried a signature that no one had ever seen written in public. I looked at the blank signature line, then at Vivian. You'll know soon enough. Her brows drew together. Before she could reply, the event coordinator rushed back. There you are. The board chair is asking where the representative is. She looked directly at me. They're waiting. The room fell strangely quiet. Charles blinked. The representative? The coordinator nodded impatiently. Mr. Harrison's representative. She gestured toward me. Him. Vivian stared as if she'd misheard. You mean the cafeteria worker? The coordinator looked confused. He's been expected all morning. Silence spread across the table. For the first time since we had met, Vivian's certainty cracked. Vivian didn't move. Neither did her father. The noise of the auditorium seemed to drift somewhere far away, swallowed by the pounding silence surrounding our table. The event coordinator frowned. Mr. Rowan? I'm here. We're ready backstage. I gave a small nod. I'll be there in a moment. She hurried away without another word. Charles Hart recovered first. His smile returned, but it was noticeably tighter. I believe there's been some misunderstanding. There hasn't. He chuckled politely. I've attended this ceremony for 8 consecutive years. I've never seen you. I've attended every year. His expression stiffened. Impossible. I usually stand behind the curtains. Vivian looked from me to her father. You know him? No. Charles answered too quickly. I've simply never met any official from the foundation. I adjusted the envelope beneath my arm. That's true. Vivian stepped forward. If you're really here for the foundation, why are you working in our cafeteria? Because I applied. She frowned. That's it. That's it. She searched my face, clearly expecting another explanation. None came. People often believed hidden stories had dramatic answers. Sometimes the answer was simply choice. She wasn't satisfied. No one chooses this. I did. Her lips parted. For the first time, she had no immediate response. Backstage, members of the foundation board stood waiting. Unlike the school's administrators, none of them looked surprised to see me. Chairwoman Eleanor Brooks offered a respectful nod. Good morning. Good morning. A silver-haired attorney smiled. You almost missed your cue. I was serving breakfast. Several board members laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because they'd long ago accepted that I would always arrive smelling faintly of fresh bread instead of expensive cologne. Eleanor handed me the ceremonial check. Everything is prepared. I examined the signature line. Blank. As intended. She lowered her voice. We can postpone the announcement if you prefer. No. Are you certain? Very. You'll lose your anonymity. I already decided that before accepting this job. She studied my face. You planned this. I planned nothing. I smiled faintly. I simply stopped running. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then it's time. Out front, the host returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before announcing this year's scholarship recipients, the Harrison Future Foundation has prepared something unprecedented. Excited whispers filled the hall. The founder has spent 15 years declining every public appearance. The audience leaned forward. But today, a deliberate pause. That changes. Reporters stood. Camera lenses shifted toward the stage entrance. Students whispered excitedly. I knew it. He's actually coming. I heard he's worth billions. No way. Vivian looked toward the stage with shining eyes. For years, she had admired a man she'd never met. Someone she imagined as sophisticated, powerful, elegant. Someone who probably arrived surrounded by security. The host smiled. Please welcome. He looked toward backstage. Mr. Adrian Harrison. I stepped through the curtains. The applause began, then stopped. Confusion spread through the auditorium faster than sound. Some people recognized me, not as Adrian Harrison, as the cafeteria worker. Wait, that's him. Impossible. Someone actually laughed. They thought it was a joke. The cameras zoomed closer. Charles Hart's face drained of color. Vivian remained completely still. Her hands slowly loosened at her sides. No, she whispered. The host continued, as though nothing unusual had happened. Founder of the Harrison Future Foundation. The silence became suffocating. I walked to the podium without hurry, without triumph, without anger, simply because 15 years of hiding had finally ended. The ceremonial check rested on the lectern. I uncapped the pen. Every camera focused on my hand. The signature flowed naturally. Adrian Harrison. One smooth motion. No hesitation. The giant screen behind me displayed the close-up. Gasps erupted across the auditorium. Someone dropped the camera. The sound echoed sharply. I placed the pen down. Thank you for coming. Nothing more. The audience remained frozen. Then Eleanor Brooks stepped beside me. I believe some introductions are overdue. She smiled toward the crowd. 15 years ago, Mr. Harrison sold his technology company and dedicated nearly his entire personal fortune to educational opportunity. A massive photograph appeared behind us. A much younger version of me shaking hands after a billion-dollar acquisition. Murmurs swept across the hall. I've seen that picture. The founder really is him. Vivian's breathing became visibly uneven. She stared from the photograph to me and back again. Her world no longer made sense. Questions erupted before the applause could recover. Reporters ignored protocol and shouted over one another. Mr. Harrison, why have you remained anonymous? Why work in a school cafeteria? Were you conducting research? Were you testing students? I raised one hand. The room gradually settled. I wasn't testing anyone. Disappointment flickered across several reporters' faces. People loved hidden social experiments. Real life rarely worked that way. I accepted ordinary work because ordinary work deserves respect. No dramatic pause. No rehearsed delivery. Just the truth. I wanted to remember something success often makes people forget. The hall remained silent. The value of a person cannot be measured by a title, salary, or the clothes they wear. My eyes naturally found Vivian. Only for a second. I met extraordinary people wearing uniforms most never notice. The elderly janitor in the back lowered his head. Mrs. Alvarez quietly wiped away a tear. The opposite is also true. I let the words settle. Status can create the illusion of character. No names. No accusations. None were necessary. After the ceremony ended, students flooded social media before leaving their seats. Phones lit every corner of the auditorium. The cafeteria worker, he founded the scholarship. I laughed at him yesterday. I have pictures. I deleted mine. Across the room, council members who had mocked me that morning avoided looking in my direction. One quietly slipped out a side exit. Another buried his face in his phone. Consequences often arrived without anyone announcing them. Vivian remained standing beside her chair. She hadn't spoken for nearly 10 minutes. Charles finally broke the silence. We should congratulate him. His voice carried forced enthusiasm. Immediately, Vivian nodded mechanically. Together they approached. Charles extended his hand. Mr. Harrison, what an incredible surprise. I accepted the handshake. Barely. Congratulations on today's announcement. Thank you. I've admired your foundation for years. I know. His smile twitched. I hope this marks the beginning of a closer partnership. It doesn't. The words landed gently, yet they struck harder than shouting ever could. His smile froze. I'm sorry, the foundation's policies haven't changed. I don't understand. You've submitted partnership proposals every year. He blinked. Yes. And every proposal required influence over recipient selection. Several nearby reporters instinctively raised their microphones. I remember each one. Charles swallowed. We merely requested. Naming privileges. I finished calmly. Reserved scholarships. Board recommendations. Promotional rights. His face slowly paled. I declined every request. A tense silence spread around us. I don't sell opportunity. Camera shutters exploded. Charles attempted another smile. There must be some misunderstanding. There isn't. His shoulders visibly sank. He understood. Every word was documented. Every proposal archived. Every rejection preserved. No argument could erase that. Vivian finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why? She looked directly into my eyes. Didn't you tell anyone? I wasn't asked. You let everyone. She couldn't finish. You let us believe. I let people make their own choices. That answer hurt her more than anger would have. Because it was true. No deception. No disguise. No lies. Only assumptions. Her assumptions. Everyone else's assumptions. She lowered her gaze. I asked for another server. You did. I embarrassed you. You did. You aren't angry? I thought about the question, then answered honestly. I was disappointed. She closed her eyes. Some wounds arrived without raising a voice. As evening settled over the campus, Eleanor Brooks handed me a folder. We've begun receiving complaints. About today? She nodded. Mostly from influential families. I opened the file. Several parents demanded the foundation clarify why a billionaire had been employed in a school cafeteria. Others accused us of manipulating public opinion. One anonymous letter claimed the reveal had been staged to humiliate wealthy donors. I quietly closed the folder. They're frightened. Eleanor smiled knowingly. Of what? That merit might actually matter. Before either of us could continue, another board member hurried toward us. His expression was unusually serious. We've discovered something. What is it? He handed me a sealed document. It concerns the Hart Educational Group. I opened it. The first page contained financial records. The second contained scholarship recommendations. The third made my expression change for the first time that day. Several names had been altered. Income statements had disappeared. Evaluation scores had been rewritten. Someone had been manipulating scholarship candidates long before applications ever reached the foundation. At the bottom of the final page, one signature appeared again and again. Charles Hart. I closed the file. Very carefully. Across the courtyard, Vivian stood alone beneath the foundation banner, unaware that the admiration she had spent years building around her father was about to collapse. And this time, I wouldn't need to do anything at all. The folder remained closed in my hands. Paper had weight. Truth had more. Eleanor watched my expression without speaking. She had served on the foundation's board almost as long as I had remained anonymous. She understood one rule better than anyone. Never accuse until the facts can survive the loudest courtroom. Who found this? I asked. Our compliance office. And they verified it? The signatures, yes. The financial trail. She hesitated. They're still checking. I nodded once. Then nobody moves. The attorney beside her frowned. But if the records are authentic, if they're authentic, they'll still be authentic tomorrow. Silence settled between us. Rushing toward justice often gave dishonesty time to escape. We collect evidence, I continued, not headlines. By the following morning, Westbridge Academy no longer looked like the same campus. Students weren't talking about exams. They weren't talking about sports. Every conversation ended the same way. The cafeteria worker. No, the founder. I can't believe I told him to clean my table. I laughed at him. Some students avoided the cafeteria entirely. Others entered only to stare. I tied my apron as usual. Mrs. Alvarez looked almost offended. You don't have to work today. I know. You don't have to work ever again. I know. Then why are you here? I placed fresh bread into the warmer. Because breakfast still starts at 7. She laughed despite herself. You really are impossible. No. I smiled. I'm consistent. The first student approached the counter. He couldn't have been older than 16. Yesterday, he had mocked my uniform with his friends. Today, he couldn't meet my eyes. His fingers tightened around his tray. I'm sorry. For what? He blinked. He looked confused by the question. I guess everything. I handed him his meal. Learn from it. That's it. That's enough. He swallowed hard. Thank you. As he walked away, several students stared in disbelief. They expected punishment, humiliation, a speech. Instead, life simply continued. Consequences didn't always require revenge. Sometimes they required memory. At exactly 8:30, Vivian entered the cafeteria alone. No council members, no friends, no confidence stride. She stood quietly in line like everyone else. Whispers followed her instead of admiration. She made him leave the serving line. I saw it. She didn't even apologize. She heard every word. So did I. When her turn arrived, she placed her tray in front of me without speaking. I served the food exactly as before. Same portions, same careful movements. When I slid the tray toward her, she didn't reach for it. I'm sorry. The cafeteria became silent. Every nearby table listened. She continued. I judged you. Yes. I believed your job defined your worth. Yes. I admired your foundation for years. A bitter smile touched her lips. I completely failed to understand it. I looked at her for several seconds. Her apology wasn't polished. It wasn't public relations. It was uncomfortable, embarrassing, real. Accepting responsibility is harder than saying sorry. She nodded slowly. I know. Then start there. She finally picked up her tray. I will. As she walked away, no one laughed. Some lessons demanded witnesses. Near noon, my phone vibrated. Eleanor, they've finished verifying the records. And they're genuine. I closed my eyes briefly. Any missing documents? No. Any doubts? None. I looked across the cafeteria. Charles Hart had built an empire around educational excellence. If these documents were genuine, he had quietly redirected deserving students toward donors' children for years. Not within my foundation, within his own scholarship network. Students whose families lacked influence had simply disappeared from recommendation lists before applications reached us. I ended the call. Mrs. Alvarez noticed my expression. Bad news. Necessary news. That afternoon, I visited the foundation headquarters for the first time in nearly a year. The receptionist stood so quickly her chair rolled backward. Mr. Harrison. Good afternoon. Employees who had only seen my name on documents quietly stepped aside as I walked through the building. No applause. No celebration. Only respect. The conference room already held the entire executive board. A projector displayed spreadsheets across one wall. Eleanor spoke first. Our investigation expanded. Show me. The attorney changed slides. Over 6 years, Hart Educational Group promoted 128 scholarship candidates. Another click. 37 files contained altered financial declarations. Another. 19 academic evaluations were rewritten. Another. 7 students withdrew after being pressured. I remained silent. The numbers were no longer statistics. They were names, lives, dreams delayed because someone believed influence could replace fairness. One photograph appeared on the screen. A young woman standing beside a grocery store. Maya Chun, Eleanor said quietly. Top science applicant. Rejected. Her income documents were replaced. I studied the image. Where is she now? Working nights. School. She couldn't afford tuition. The room became painfully quiet. I finally looked up. Find her. We already have. Offer her the scholarship. It's been 6 years. Learning doesn't expire. Several board members lowered their eyes. That single sentence carried more weight than any speech I had given yesterday. The attorney cleared his throat. There's another issue. What? The altered records weren't created personally by Charles Hart. Who then? He changed the slide. A familiar face appeared. Dean Malcolm Pierce, Westbridge Academy's vice principal. He coordinated recommendations. I looked carefully at the documents. Charles signed the approvals. Yes. Pierce prepared them. Yes. So neither acted alone. No. A network. Not one dishonest man. An entire system. As evening approached, my car stopped outside a modest apartment complex. Apartment 3B. Maya opened the door cautiously. She looked tired, older than her 24 years. Can I help you? I'm Adrian Harrison. She stared blankly. Then recognition slowly reached her eyes. The founder? I nodded. I owe you an apology. Confusion replaced caution. For what? For taking 6 years to find you. She laughed softly, not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. I think. Her voice trembled. You have the wrong address. I don't. I handed her the restored scholarship file. She opened it. Her hands began shaking. My application. It should never have been rejected. She read silently. Halfway through the documents, tears fell onto the pages. I thought. She struggled to breathe. I thought I wasn't good enough. No, you were. I blamed myself. You shouldn't have. She covered her mouth, unable to speak. Sometimes injustice stole opportunities. Sometimes it stole confidence. The second theft lasted longer. I can't give you back 6 years. I said quietly, but I can make sure the 7th looks different. She looked at me through tear-filled eyes. Why? Because this foundation exists for moments exactly like this. When I returned to my car, my phone rang again. Eleanor, Charles Hart just called. I imagine he did. He wants a private meeting. When? Tonight. I started the engine. Did he say why? He insists everything is a misunderstanding. I looked through the windshield as rain began tapping softly against the glass. No, I said at last. It isn't. At that exact moment, across the city, Charles Hart sat alone in his office. Stacks of financial records covered his desk. His expensive suit jacket lay forgotten across a chair. His confident smile had disappeared. For the first time in decades, he wasn't planning another deal. He was searching desperately for a way to survive the truth. And somewhere in the same building, Vice Principal Malcolm Pierce quietly fed confidential files into a paper shredder, believing that if enough evidence disappeared before sunrise. So what is guilt? He had no idea copies already existed in 3 different locations. The collapse had already begun. He simply hadn't heard it yet. Rain drummed steadily against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Harrison Future Foundation headquarters. The conference room was quiet except for the ticking of an old wall clock. At exactly 7 o'clock, Charles Hart walked in. His tie was perfectly straight. His smile was carefully measured. Only his tired eyes betrayed him. He stopped a few feet from the table. Mr. Harrison, Mr. Hart, Eleanor and the Foundation's legal counsel remained seated on either side of me. A digital recorder rested openly on the table. Charles noticed it immediately. So, this is formal. It needs to be. He gave a small nod and sat down. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he leaned forward. I made mistakes. You did, but nothing was done out of malice. I folded my hands. Explain. He took a slow breath. Our scholarship recommendations favored students from influential families. I've seen the records. They were families capable of giving back to society. They already had opportunities. They also had expectations. No, I replied quietly. They had advantages. His jaw tightened. You've never run an educational institution. No, I've had to balance donors, politicians, parents. You balance them by removing deserving students. Silence. Charles looked toward the recorder before speaking again. Vice Principal Pierce handled the paperwork. He prepared it. Charles hesitated. I signed it. The admission hung in the air. It wasn't enough to clear everything, but it was enough to remove every remaining excuse. I never intended to hurt anyone. I looked directly into his eyes. Intent doesn't erase consequence. For the first time, Charles had no answer. Half an hour later, another chair was occupied. Malcolm Pierce looked far less composed. Sweat dampened the collar of his shirt despite the cool room. He glanced nervously between me and the attorneys. I don't understand why I'm here. The legal counsel slid a thick binder across the table. You do. Pierce opened it. His face immediately lost all color. Inside were photocopies of every document he had tried to destroy. His lips trembled. Ow! Digital backups. Eleanor answered calmly. 3 independent archives. Pierce slowly closed the binder. I can explain. So, can the timestamps? The attorney projected security footage onto the screen. There he was, feeding documents into the shredder, checking over his shoulder, returning twice to make sure nothing remained. The room remained silent until the footage ended. Then I asked only one question. How many students did you convince yourself didn't matter? Pierce lowered his head. How many? I don't know. That answer hurt more than any number could have, because it meant he had stopped counting. By morning, the Foundation submitted every verified document to the authorities. No press conference, no dramatic announcement, just evidence. Facts didn't require theatrics. They required integrity. The news broke before noon. Every major network carried the same headline. Education executive under investigation for scholarship fraud. By evening, a second headline replaced it. Vice principal suspended pending criminal inquiry. Outside Westbridge Academy, reporters crowded the entrance. Students gathered in uneasy groups, whispering as television cameras rolled. Inside the administration building, the atmosphere was tense. Faculty members who had once rushed to greet Charles Hart now quietly avoided his office. His assistant packed files into cardboard boxes without speaking. The illusion of untouchable authority had vanished overnight. I returned to the cafeteria that afternoon. The familiar scent of fresh bread and soup greeted me. Mrs. Alvarez smiled warmly. I saved your apron. I looked at it hanging neatly on its hook. You didn't have to. I wanted to. I put it on. Several students looked surprised. One finally asked, "Why are you still working here?" I smiled as I picked up the serving spoon. Because this place still needs lunch. Soft laughter spread through the line. Not mocking laughter. Comfortable laughter. The kind that came from understanding someone a little better. Near the end of the lunch period, Vivian approached again. This time she wasn't carrying a tray. She held a folder. I've resigned. I looked up. From the student council. She placed the resignation letter on the counter. I don't deserve to lead while pretending none of this happened. You made mistakes. I made choices. She corrected herself. And those choices hurt people. I nodded. They did. She looked toward the students eating quietly around us. I spent years believing leadership meant standing above others. And now, I think. She took a long breath. It means being the first to admit when you're wrong. For the first time since we'd met, I saw no pride in her eyes. Only honesty. I pushed the folder back toward her. Don't resign. She looked startled. What? Resigning is easy. She frowned. You think staying is harder? I know it is. She looked down at the letter. What if they never forgive me? They don't owe you forgiveness. She looked up slowly. What do I owe them? Better decisions. Her fingers tightened around the folder. Then, without another word, she tore the resignation letter into small pieces. Not because everything was fixed, because rebuilding required staying. She gave me a quiet nod before walking away. Mrs. Alvarez watched the exchange from across the kitchen. You just gave away the easiest victory. I wasn't looking for one. She smiled knowingly. I figured. That evening, I stood alone in the Foundation archives. Rows upon rows of scholarship files stretched before me. Thousands of names. Thousands of futures. Eleanor quietly joined me. It's over. I looked at the shelves. No. She raised an eyebrow. No. The investigation is over. I gently rested my hand on one shelf. The work isn't. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Outside, rain finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long golden beams across the city. Somewhere beyond those buildings, students were filling out scholarship applications. Some would succeed. Some would fail honestly. None, if I could help it, would ever again be pushed aside because someone believed status mattered more than potential. Charles Hart's empire had begun collapsing, not because I destroyed it, because the truth finally stood where influence no longer could. Winter arrived quietly. The banners celebrating the Foundation's 15th anniversary had long been taken down, replaced by ordinary notices about exams, sports tournaments, and club meetings. Westbridge Academy looked normal again. People, however, were not. Some changes lingered long after headlines disappeared. I was ladling tomato soup into bowls when the familiar sound of a cane tapping against the cafeteria floor caught my attention. Mr. Howard, the elderly janitor who had once silently handed me a dustpan, smiled as he reached the counter. "So," he said, "am I allowed to call you Mr. Harrison now?" I smiled back. "You've always been allowed to call me Adrian." He chuckled. "I think I'll stick with Adrian." I handed him a bowl before he reached for his wallet. "Today's on me." He frowned. "I can pay." "I know." "Then why?" "Because once, when everyone else looked away, you stopped to help me clean broken coffee cups." He blinked. "I only handed you a dustpan. Most people didn't even do that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded slowly. "Funny. What is?" "I spent 40 years thinking nobody noticed janitors." "I noticed." He smiled, took his lunch, and quietly walked away. Sometimes gratitude arrived months after the kindness that inspired it. Later that afternoon, the Foundation welcomed a new group of scholarship finalists. Instead of a formal auditorium, we invited them into a simple meeting room. No stage, no expensive decorations, just a circle of chairs. One by one, they introduced themselves. Some spoke confidently. Others could barely keep their voices steady. Finally, a young woman stood. Maya Chun. I recognized her immediately. 6 years had changed her posture, but not the determination in her eyes. She smiled. "I've accepted the Foundation's offer." Warm applause filled the room. "I'll begin studying biomedical engineering next semester." Several students congratulated her. Then she looked at me. I almost declined. The room became quiet. I thought I was too old. She laughed softly. I convinced myself that opportunity had an expiration date. She paused before continuing. "Mr. Harrison reminded me that learning doesn't." No one applauded immediately. The silence itself carried respect. When the applause finally came, it lasted much longer. That evening, Eleanor handed me another folder. "These aren't investigation files." "What are they?" "Letters." I opened it. Hundreds. Students. Parents. Teachers. Former scholarship recipients. Some apologized. Some expressed gratitude. Others shared stories they had never told anyone. One envelope contained only a single sentence. "Thank you for seeing people before seeing their circumstances." I read it twice before closing the folder. "Keep them," Eleanor said. "I don't need praise." "They aren't praise." She smiled gently. "They're reminders." Spring arrived with new beginnings. Westbridge Academy held elections for the next student council president. Many expected Vivian to disappear quietly after everything that had happened. She didn't. Instead, she stood before the student body and delivered the shortest campaign speech anyone could remember. I made serious mistakes. No dramatic music. No polished slogans. No excuses. I judged people by appearances. She looked across the crowded auditorium. "I can't erase those choices." A long silence followed, "But I can make different ones." She stepped away from the microphone. That was all. Some students still voted against her. Many didn't trust her yet. She accepted every result without complaint. When the ballots were counted, she lost by a narrow margin. She smiled anyway. Later that afternoon, I found her helping first-year students carry boxes into a community supply room. No cameras, no audience, just work. She noticed me. I lost. I heard. I thought it would hurt more. "It probably will." She laughed. "You're honest." "I try." She leaned against one of the boxes. "I used to think leadership came from winning. And now, I think it comes from serving." I looked at the stack of donated school supplies beside her. "You've learned something valuable." "I hope so." She hesitated before asking, "Do you think people can really change?" I thought of Charles Hart, of Malcolm Pierce, of Maya, of a young student who had apologized in the cafeteria. They can, What decides it? Whether they change after being exposed. I met her eyes, or before they have to. She nodded slowly, understanding more than the words themselves. Months later, the cafeteria reopened after renovations. The school administration wanted to rename it in my honor. I declined. Instead, a simple bronze plaque appeared near the entrance. It read, "Every person you meet deserves dignity before judgment." No name appeared beneath it. Students asked why. Mrs. Alvarez smiled whenever they did. Because the message matters more than the messenger. I couldn't have said it better myself. That afternoon, lunch lines stretched across the room as usual. Students laughed. Teachers hurried between classes. Trays clattered. Soup simmered. Life moved forward. Not because the past had been forgotten, because it had finally been understood. As I served another meal, I noticed a first-year student quietly step aside to hold the door open for one of the cafeteria cleaners, pushing a heavy cart. No one told him to. No one applauded. He simply did it. I smiled to myself. Real change rarely announced its arrival. It revealed itself in ordinary moments. And those moments, repeated often enough, could shape an entire future. The courtroom was almost full. Not because the case involved enormous amounts of money. Not because Charles Hart had once been one of the city's most influential philanthropists. People came because they wanted to understand how someone admired by thousands had quietly failed the very students he claimed to support. Reporters filled the back rows. Former scholarship applicants sat together in silence. Teachers from Westbridge Academy occupied an entire section. I took a seat near the aisle. Not at the front. Not behind the prosecution. Just another observer. That was where I belonged. Charles Hart entered a few moments later. His expensive suits had disappeared. The confidence that once filled every room with him had disappeared too. For the first time since we met, he looked his age. He noticed me immediately. Our eyes met briefly. He gave a tired nod. I returned it. Nothing more. The judge entered. The proceedings began. Witnesses testified one after another. Financial analysts explained altered records. Former employees described years of quiet pressure. Parents spoke about opportunities their children had unexpectedly lost. Then Maya Chun stepped into the witness box. She stood calmly. I believed I wasn't intelligent enough. Her voice remained steady. For 6 years, I blamed myself. She looked toward the judge. I later learned someone else had made that decision for me. The courtroom fell silent. She wasn't angry. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was simply telling the truth. Sometimes truth carried more force than outrage ever could. When Charles was finally called to testify, he didn't deny the evidence. He didn't blame his lawyers. He didn't blame Vice Principal Pierce. He looked exhausted. I signed the approvals. The judge watched him carefully. Why? Charles lowered his eyes. I convinced myself that protecting powerful relationships would eventually help more students. He paused. I was wrong. The courtroom remained quiet. His confession couldn't restore the lost years. It couldn't erase stolen opportunities, but it ended the last remaining lie. The verdict arrived before sunset. Fraud, abuse of fiduciary responsibility, professional disqualification, financial penalties, a custodial sentence. No cheers followed. Justice wasn't entertainment. As officers approached, Charles looked toward me one last time. I admired your conviction. His voice was barely audible. I just didn't have it. I answered honestly. You had it. He frowned slightly. You simply traded it away. He closed his eyes. For the first time since our paths crossed, he offered no defense. He walked out quietly. The courtroom doors closed behind him. An entire reputation ended not with shouting, but with silence. Outside, reporters rushed toward me. Mr. Harrison, do you feel vindicated? Was this your revenge? I stopped on the courthouse steps. No. One reporter frowned. Then what is this? A consequence. Do you hate Charles Hart? I thought about the question, then shook my head. Hatred would have kept me looking backward. So what kept you moving? I smiled faintly. The students. Without another word, I walked past the cameras. Their microphones never followed. They had already received the only answer that mattered. 1 year later, the spring sunlight poured through the large windows of the Harrison Future Foundation's new Student Resource Center. The building wasn't named after me. It was named the Opportunity Center. That felt right. Names faded. Purpose endured. Inside, hundreds of students met with mentors, received career guidance, and applied for scholarships. Maya Chinao volunteered there every Saturday while completing her engineering degree. Mrs. Alvarez coordinated meal programs for visiting students. Mr. Howard, officially retired, insisted on coming twice a week just to water the indoor plants. He claimed the plants needed him. Everyone knew he simply liked watching young people succeed. Vivian arrived, carrying a stack of application folders. She had declined another attempt at student politics after graduation. Instead, she accepted a full-time position with the Foundation's outreach team. Her first proposal had been simple: blind scholarship screening. Names, family backgrounds, social status, all hidden during the first review. Only ability, only effort, only potential. The board unanimously approved it. She placed the folders on my desk. The first pilot program is ready. I open one file. No family name, no donor history, no photographs. Exactly as it should be. You've done good work. She smiled. A year ago, I would have wanted praise. And today I'm just glad the system is fairer than the one I inherited. I nodded. So am I. She turned to leave, then paused. Adrian. Yes. I used to admire the founder of this foundation. She smiled warmly. Now I admire the man who served lunch without needing anyone to know who he was. After she left, I looked out across the courtyard. Students hurried between buildings. Some laughed. Some worried about exams. Some carried dreams far larger than their bank accounts. None of them knew how many invisible decisions had protected the opportunities waiting ahead. That was fine. The strongest foundations were rarely seen. As afternoon arrived, I left my office and walked into the cafeteria. The lunch rush had already begun. A nervous new employee stood behind the serving line, clearly overwhelmed. Trays piled up. Students grew impatient. I quietly picked up an apron hanging nearby. The young worker stared at me. Sir, you don't have to. I tied the apron strings behind my back. I know. I picked up the serving spoon. Let's make sure everyone gets a warm meal. He smiled with relief. Together, we served lunch. No cameras, no speeches, no applause. Just ordinary work done with ordinary kindness. As another student accepted a tray, I noticed him pause before thanking the cafeteria staff, not out of obligation, but with genuine respect. I smiled. Years ago, people had looked at my uniform and decided who I was. Today, someone looked at another uniform and chose respect first. That quiet choice was worth more than every headline, every fortune, and every title I had ever carried. Because the greatest legacy I could leave behind was never the money I donated. It was a reminder that a person's dignity should never depend on the job they do. The end.